as part of the just want to let you know this meeting is being recorded. So we are all participating in the meeting and wanted to make you aware of that. So now that folks are here, just to introduce myself, I'm Executive Director of the Washington Homeownership Resource Center, and I'll talk a little bit more about us as an organization. But first, I wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. For non-Indigenous communities, land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples of the land on which we work and live. Acknowledgement is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. So I want to start by saying we want to acknowledge that we are all, wherever we are today, on unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Thank you very much for participating and making space for that today. So as we progress, there should be a slide prior to this one. Yep, that's the one. Okay, so just a little bit about Washington Homeownership Resource Center, also known as WHRC. We were formed collaboratively by the Seattle Mortgage Bankers Association, the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, and numerous nonprofit counseling agencies in 1996 as a clearinghouse for low and moderate income home buyers to get resources that would help them achieve that dream of homeownership. And so it was a highly collaborative venture in the very beginning. I always like to let people know that because many people might remember us as Chalk and aren't aware that WHRC is Chalk in a more evolved new form. So, in that particular time, we really focused our energies on home buyers, but in around, 2005, we really started to move to a statewide platform, and we started to see more calls from foreclosure. And in particular, in 2007, we started to get a lot of calls to our hotline about foreclosure prevention. That's when foreclosure really became part of our service portfolio. In 2011, the Foreclosure Fairness Act passed and created an official statewide toll-free hotline for homeowners in distress to reach out for help accessing the resources they might need to prevent foreclosure. And we have been managing and operating that hotline ever since. So that really solidified foreclosure prevention as part of the work that we do. And since then, we have increased the partnerships that we have through the Foreclosure Fairness Act with counseling agencies, consumer protection agencies, the Department of Commerce, which runs the mediation, legal aid nonprofits, the loan servicers, financial institutions. This partnership is something that really was formalized and solidified by the Foreclosure Fairness Act. We've also expanded to include partnerships with county treasurers and county assessors to help address preventing tax lien foreclosure. And we have a lot of partnerships with programs that do repair assistance, which is something that is really helpful for helping prevent, in particular, seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities from losing their homes due to lack of funds or physical capacity for making necessary repairs to their property. So we really partner far and wide with a lot of the folks who are on this meeting today and who cover different parts of the home ownership experience, whether that's sort of at the beginning of the experience, moving into home ownership, or more during the home ownership process. And so just in general, I would say, especially the foreclosure prevention work that we do is really highly collaborative. And next slide, please. So it's a highly collaborative work. Even before the Foreclosure Fairness Act, during the Great Recession, Many of the housing counseling agencies worked together on foreclosure prevention fairs, where we would have these huge events and have people come to those events. The loan servicers would send their staff to come and meet with people. And it was really a great spirit of collaboration that has always been there in the foreclosure prevention space. And as I mentioned, with the passage of the Foreclosure Fairness Act, that collaboration is really now really baked into the whole foreclosure prevention service sector. We have the nonprofit service providers, the financial institutions, and the regulatory agencies really working together. And our impact has been huge. We've helped over 76,000 households with a success rate for avoiding foreclosure that is higher than the national average and higher than what you get with housing counseling alone. So we know that the protections in the Foreclosure Fairness Act work, and we also know that our work is more effective because of the strong partnerships that we have and the collaboration that we have with each other. In addition to collaborating to provide services, we also collaborate with each other each year to talk about what's working in foreclosure prevention, what might need to change. Do we always agree on what needs to change? Nope, we don't. Sometimes we agree on where we need to go, but we don't agree on how to get there. And that is just sort of part of working in partnership. And because we've worked together for so long, we can really rely on our knowledge that the other folks in the conversation believe as strongly as we do, that people should have every chance possible to save their homes for foreclosure. And if something isn't working the way it should, we all want to fix it. So that trust has allowed us to have a really amazing impact. As I mentioned, I am sharing all of this because I want to really pump you up for the incredible impact that you are all going to have by working together on this initiative to increase the number of BIPOC homeowners in Washington state. And I think you may find yourself here today working with partners that are people who are new to you. You might find yourself working with partners that are folks that
I am
typically at odds with. And so I want to, they may raise a potential action item that you wouldn't have even thought of. So I think that's one of the beauty of all of us coming from different sectors, is it's so easy for us to, there's so much work to be done that it is really easy for us to just keep our heads down and keep plowing forward in our track, in our silo, and not really look up to see what's happening in the other silos, and realize that we may actually be moving towards the same goal, duplicating efforts, accidentally working at cross purposes, but really working with the common goal. I think that is a way for us to make a much more holistic impact and a bigger impact. Definitely. And the reason I have this slide up is I really just want to emphasize that a lot of what we are taking on in this work is going to result in systems change or require systems change. We will be able to do some things within the systems that exist. There are some things for which I think we would like to see the system change. And in order for us to affect that system change on this grand scale that the systems operate on, we are going to really have to all work together and pool our collective energy and our collective knowledge. So I think that is my pep talk for us today. The changes and actions that we're going to be taking together are going to support BIPOC renters who want to become homeowners. It's going to help BIPOC homeowners stay housed through life's ups and downs, and potentially change the systems that have perpetuated the exclusion of people of color from homeownership. And I think, that we will be able to make racial parity in homeownership something that exists rather than something we're talking about as a goal. So I'm really excited to work with everybody today and leverage all of our resources and expertise to have that big impact. And so hopefully you are ready to get to work. And now to sort of introduce that to us for the day, our plan for the day, and give you some background information on why we're here and what we're doing, I'm going to turn things over to Patience Malaba, who is the Director of Government Relations and Policy with the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County. Take it away, Patience.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you for that inspirational reminder of our collective strength and power, and really appreciate the profound work that you are doing in preventing foreclosure. So thank you. And I am glad that we have such a great crowd this morning for what will continue to be this important deep dive into the analysis that is behind some of the systems change issues that Dennis was raising earlier, but also as it relates to homeownership rates overall, the gaps that we see, the need to sustain ownership in our region, and the racial wealth gap as well. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us once again. It is wonderful to see so many of the familiar faces that were at the first summit. It's also wonderful to see new faces that are joining us. As introduced, I am Patience Malaba. I serve as Director of Government Relations and Policy at the Housing Development Consortium. So welcome to our second BIPOC Homeownership Initiative convening. And I want to really begin by thanking you and expressing my gratitude for number one, your time, and number two, your expertise, the expertise you bring to this conversation as we collectively dig deeper and create thought partnership to tackle the disproportionate access to homeownership, especially for Black households. So we successfully convened our first summit in March, which brought together stakeholders to begin discussing actionable steps to close the gap between Black homeownership rates and white homeownership rates in the Puget Sound region. And at that first convening, the summit participants were given the task of identifying actionable, immediate, mid-range, and long-term strategies to achieve our challenge statement. And I want us to ground this event by going back to that challenge statement and remembering what it is. Next slide, please. So we aspire to reach a time when the home ownership rates for BIPOC communities in Washington state will be equal to those of their white peers. Our focus is on increasing and sustaining Black home ownership. So what are we challenging ourselves to do? By 2041, we will increase Black home ownership by 60,000 new homeowners. That translates to 3,000 new homeowners annually, which will double the Black home ownership rate in the Puget Sound region and close the Black-white home ownership gap that we have in our region. The participants at the event in tackling how we address and get to a point of achieving this huge goal that we've placed for ourselves were divided into 6 work groups. And the work groups focused on, number one, buyer identification and preparation. Number 2, construction financing as a specific group. Number 3, land scale production and alternative methods. The 4th group was looking at mortgage lending. The 5th group was looking at policy reform. And finally, we had a group looking at sustaining home ownership. And because we were eager to build on that effort and really urgently move forward, that is why we are reconvening today to come back to a place where we further brainstorm, recognize the ongoing work that many of you are already doing, ask ourselves the question of how do we scale some of that work? How do we collaborate together on some of that work to really have a larger impact and meet the goal that we've set for ourselves? So the groups have, however, been collapsed into 5 groups, recognizing the intersection of some of the work within some of the groups. So the groups that you have today, if you are not already aware of the group that you are in, they will be buyer identification and preparation and sustaining home ownership. And then there will also be construction financing. And then you have the land scale production alternative methods as a standalone group and the policy reform group as a standalone group as well. And the goal of our work here is to have a finalized strategy that we will report on later on this year. Next slide, please, so folks have clarity on what that will be. So the groups will be meeting and you will get more details on the purposes and objectives of the group work. But really our intent is that Now, number one, we have a repository in a web page that is on the HDC website. If you go to the Housing Development Consortium website and you go to programs, you will find the BIPOC Homeownership webpage, where a lot of the articles that were shared at the first meeting and the PowerPoints and the recordings from that first meeting are housed, and we'll continue to update that with all the resources. And throughout the time as groups meet, we will keep that page updated. But our goal as these groups refine and prioritize strategies is that on October 5th and 6th, we would have clear, actionable strategies that can be presented at the Housing Washington conference by representatives coming from this collective group that will be working together. So wanted to emphasize that and really highlight those next steps. And you will hear more in the next session as they talk about the work groups. Next slide, please. So I intended to briefly, just before going into the data, really talk to you about the overview of our agenda today. First, of course, we've kicked off the event. We'll open with a plenary, and then we will have a work session on the objectives and processes. We will also have time in our breakout rooms to go back and revisit the discussions that we had in March, but also bring in the new energy and the new ideas that is being brought by folks who are joining us for the first time today. We will then come back, report out, and synthesize what came out of those discussions. And then we'll conclude with a summary and clear next steps so you all know what to do following this event in preparation for the October event. And we will close at 3 p.m. But going back to what brought us together in March and continues to bring us today together, it was that we have decades of racial injustice and economic inequality that has consistently, persistently led to disparities in wealth, specifically for BIPOC communities and disproportionately for Black households. One of the foundational steps, as you know, in America to build wealth is home ownership. And at our first summit, we had some data review, but since then there has been a lot of work at both national, local level by some of our partners who are here and also by other organizations elsewhere. We're really seeing the moment that came out of the racial reckoning from last summer and getting to a point where we are all taking action beyond just talking about the challenges that we see from centuries of discrimination. So I put up this data just to show you where we are today in 2021. And this is from the US Census Bureau, where they're looking at the rates coming up to 2021. The gap in home ownership rates between Black and white Americans has grown by about 30%. And you will see that if you look at the rates between those two groups as shown in the slide. And the fact that Black homeownership has persisted to fall behind and be even lower than what it was before the Fair Housing Law really tells us that a lot more work needs to be done in order for us to undo the 300 years leg up that other groups have had that Black households have really not had. So it's important for us to put a final note on this gap being impacted also by the COVID-19 pandemic that we are in right now. And data is not clear right now on those rates, but there is emphasis that there's going to be huge impact on that. And as a result of the gap in the home ownership rates by race, you will also go back to the wealth and see that we continue to have this gap that continues to grow. Next slide, please. So as you see in this slide, Black households have only 1/8 of the wealth that a median white household has. And if you look at that in terms of actual numbers, and this is coming from the McKinsey report that is focused on the economic state of Black America. And this is a report from just 2021. In looking at that report, you will see that for median white households, their average income is at $188,000. And if you look at that in numbers for Black households, it's at $24,000 for those households. So when you really look at their final numbers themselves, they really tell a lot more in terms of the disparity and the gap that we continue to see, that even despite having access for some Black households to homeownership opportunities, the average to the median wealth of Black household continues to be far much lower. Next slide, please. And as you go through all income levels throughout the Black households, you realize that the racial wealth gap exists in all levels of the percentiles of wealth. The lowest group within the Black household, which is in the 10th percentile, that's where you will see that it's actually in the negative in terms of the net worth. And that's the opposite for white households when you're looking at that specific percentile. And as you go up and look at other percentiles as well, you'll still realize that we're seeing a huge gap. With that said, combating a long history of discrimination that continues to show up in policies that exist, in policies that existed many years ago, because there is so much momentum, there's so much commitment from across sectors, from the banking sector, from the housing sector, and from all levels of government, whether it's a federal or local level, there is a lot of momentum that we're seeing. I'm thankful that there are people who are doing that work, and I know we do have people who are doing that work here. And I want to say that this is the moment. This is the moment for us to close that gap. And I am really honored to be here with all of you, partnering with you in moving this work forward. I highlighted here some of the work that's happening at the national level. There is a bill that is looking at the American Dream Down Payment Act, which would enable access to down payment accounts through a tax credit system at the federal level for specifically BIPOC households. And there are efforts that are close and similar to what we are convening on today. The National Housing Conference put out their 7-point plan already. That's a really to look at and learn from as we go forward while we are looking at our own context here locally. The Urban Institute has also put out a 5-point framework. So there's not any deficit of resources or efforts that are happening, and really want to encourage all of you who are here today to move forward in our actionable steps and prepare for what we will be doing by October 5th, where we will have actionable steps. Now, with that said, we want to hear some of the work that the folks that joined us in March have done since then. And I will hand over to Muddy, who will lead us into a plenary session in hearing on some of the great work that is happening.
Super, thank you, Patience. It's really I'm glad that you have given us this introduction, and Denise as well. We can move on to the slide for the plenaries if you could. Thank you. So I noted in the chat for the plenary speakers that we're running behind schedule here. So let's try to limit our time to 3 to 4 minutes if we can. And one of the things Denise mentioned was this ability for us to be network weavers, and we're really trying to close triangles. And we know that this is already happening. I tend to follow what's going on in terms of relationships between members and outside of this group. And things are already starting to happen. So we want to model that again today and see what we can do to continue to bring connections together. So I'm wondering if we could start with Daryl. Can you give us 3 to 4 minutes on what Homesite is doing specifically around your down payment assistance program? I believe Daryl is with us.
Indeed, I am. Thank you, Marty, and thank you, Denise and Patience. Really appreciate the regathering, if you will. It looks like there are about 83 folks on this call, which is really encouraging, and partnership is really what it's going to take to close the gap that I think we all agree is egregious and evil. Since meeting with all of you last March, Homesite has been engaged in some pretty deep relationship building, and we've come up with a new portion of our revolving loan fund, which we are calling the Black Homeownership Fund. We are in partnership with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. They are represented here today by Nicole Bascom-Green, who will speak on their behalf. We're happy and honored to be working with them in this effort. We were also joined by Windermere Real Estate, my former firm when I was a broker in the 90s. And together with Homesite, we have created a fund which we intend to be about $100,000 or more year after year to provide deferred loans, down payment assistance up to about $12,000, which we would layer with a Homesite first and second mortgage. Those second mortgages are also deferred loans. So we're looking to hopefully target Black families, African-American families, first-time purchasers, second-time purchasers, with an additional $12,000 in the amount of a deferred loan that would be paid back after 30 years or when the home is refinanced or sold. And really to focus on the gap that we're discovering as an organization where we want to serve between about 80 and 120% of AMI. That area is where we have the most possibility of layering additional help for purchasers to get into a home. And we couldn't do this without the partnership of the folks I mentioned. So we're really pleased that we as a lender can put some muscle behind the efforts of partners to really help us find more purchasers and get them into homes. So yesterday we had an introduction of this new fund with what I would call connectors and other luminaries from the African-American community here in Seattle and frankly beyond, because as a statewide certified CDFI, we can provide our loan products across the state of Washington. And we know that there are communities that can use this type of effort. And so this is one area that Homesite can lean in on in partnership with others to try to really do what we can to close the gap. So we're excited by this. We want to roll this out formally this fall, although we'll do a bit of a soft opening and get some purchasers in line to be able to take advantage of this. So we're really happy to be here today and pleased to be a part of this panel. And thank you all for all of the great work that's going to really be needed to make this happen. Those numbers are pitiful and egregious and everything else I can say in terms of how it makes me feel on a personal level. So appreciate it. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you for that exciting announcement and the depth at which you continue to try to move us ahead. I'm going to jump now to Nate from the Department of Commerce. I know Nate's got some time limitations here. Nate, I know that Commerce got an allocation of funding, I believe, from the legislature. Can you tell us where you're headed with this?
Yeah, thanks, Marty, and good to see everybody. Daryl, Denise, it was great to hear your updates. And I did speak with the Homeownership Washington group earlier this month, so we did provide an overview of what's happening with Commerce. I was looking back at my notes from the last conversation that we had here and was reminded that homeownership is a journey, not an event. And I think we're all on this journey to try to rectify a system that Daryl aptly described as egregious and evil. We've got a lot of work to be done. We got an appropriation of about $360 million, a combination of federal and state funding. A large portion of that is set aside for rapid capital housing acquisition, and we're targeting a $12.5 million funding for homeownership, which is an increase of 1.2 million from the prior biennium. Last biennium we were able to fund 19 projects and 237 units. So, but we know that the pipeline is significantly larger. In our stage 1 applications, we had 38 projects suggest that they would be coming in for funding. So we know there's going to be a lot of competition. And so we are going to be, the NOSA funding is available now. If you haven't seen it, please check our website. And we will be out there giving technical assistance and work. The application is due September 16th, so you have a little bit of time, but I'm sure many of you are already eagerly working on that. I think another important update from us is that there was a proviso in the operating budget for a homeownership disparity work group. this work is to be led by Commerce with the formation of a work panel, a work group that includes organizations and entities led by and serving Black, Indigenous, and people of color, by state and local government agencies, with associations representing cities and county cities and housing authorities, and professionals from private sector industries. I've been in conversation with Marty and Denise a little bit, not as in depth as we would love to be partnering on this. We are the proviso. It calls for director to appoint a chair. We provided a list of recommended members and potential chair people, and we expect a decision and invitation for that. It did call for the first meeting to be held before August 1st. I can't guarantee that that'll be accomplished, given respectful time constraints and scheduling needs. So, but we are working on a strategy. Commerce has a range of equity initiatives that we're trying to make sure that this integrates into. But there is the expectation that we have a report produced within a year that includes comprehensive analysis of our portfolio and our grant making procedures and policies to make sure that we are investing and supporting this initiative. So I wanted to flag that as coming up, and I do have many of you listed as interested parties for that work group. Again, we don't know. It says to recruit and appoint 12 members. I can think of 12 organizations that alone want to have representation. So trying to make sure we have a good diverse work group for that is going to be important. Lastly, I'd say I really commend and appreciate that that this group has formulated a concrete strategy, a concrete goal of creating 60,000 new housing units. And I just think that will help us all organize and line up to support and pull our weight in doing that work. We had another kind of mandate. The Poverty Reduction Working Group is another group that have been tracking, and I think they've been doing really tremendous work. And they called for the Housing Trust Fund to increase our production three times over. So even though we have a record, we keep getting record investments, they're still asking us to do 10,000 housing units a year. And that work group, I think, has really centered race, and I think figuring out ways that we are aligned. We know that there's competition in the field and increased tension around the prioritization of funding, and we think this is really a high priority, and we really support the work that you're doing. So I appreciate the time, and I apologize that my meeting constraints will limit my participation today.
Thank you, Nate. And Nicole, I know you also are under some time constraints. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on at NARAB, 2 to 3 minutes if possible? Thank you.
I certainly can. Thank you, Marty, and thank you everyone who's preceding me in this conversation. So I'll be as brief as possible because I'm wearing 2 hats actually. I'm here to represent the National Association of Real Estate Brokers as a Seattle chapter president, but also as a community affairs manager for US Bank. I'm having this conversation with this homeownership focus from both fronts. So first, I'll give you the update from NARAB. As Daryl mentioned, we have been partnering with HomeSite and doing this through our national 5 pillars. So we have 5 pillars with which we work from a national perspective, and then we drill down here locally in our local areas where we have chapters who are representing Black homeownership, which has been the entire impetus of our work as the oldest minority trade organization and the Black trade organization for real estate professionals when we weren't able to be members of the National Association of Realtors. So NARAB has been in this business for many, many years, and we're doing this again through our 5-point pillars: faith-based and civic engagement, women initiatives, diversity and inclusion with small businesses, multi-generational wealth, and government relations and advocacy. And so we are, again, part of that is partnering with our community members, those who are at the forefront of this work, which is with Homesite, and supporting the Black Homeownership Initiative that Homesite is rolling out. We're really pleased to be a part of that and happy to be supporting it to help, one, identify those people who are going to be using this program. That's really what this is about. So NARAB, we are in the trenches, have been with Black homeownership, and we are looking forward to continuing that work, particularly here where our numbers, again, as everyone has said, are abysmal to say the least. But from the U.S. Bank perspective, we also are supporting this homeownership and the Black community as a whole from a national perspective. And also here locally, we have committed $115 million to the Black community through our Access Commitment program, which is going to be increasing the support of the Black community through philanthropic support through our foundation, small business support through our CDC, and home ownership support through our Mortgage Strategic Markets channel. So part of that is with Daryl, again, we are partnering with Homesite, and we have seeded $35,000 into that home ownership program initiative through our foundation to ensure that these dollars are going directly to the Black community and to these Black homeowners to help increase that home ownership. We've also have a home ownership program through our strategic markets through mortgage, where we are providing mortgage products. We're working with bringing in junior MLOs and mortgage loan officers who look like the people they are trying to serve. So we have brought in two young ladies I'm very excited about. We're setting up mentoring programs, we're setting up education, we're setting up support to ensure that we are both internally and externally supporting the community through this work. So that's just a high level from both organizations, the work that we're doing to support this. I look forward to the continued conversation and connectivity to ensure that we move the needle on these numbers here in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, Marty.
Very well done, Nicole, and thank you for all you're leading on. It's amazing the work that you're doing. And I just want to call out, Nate put a item in the chat. Nate, you're not allowed to hire patients. She's not up for grabs, but let's make sure we do find someone, and hopefully a person of color, to take that job at Commerce. So let's move on. And I want to zoom out if we can. Beth, I think you're with us. Beth Castro, can you talk a little bit about what you know about what Project Reach is up to at the broader level?
I absolutely can. Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. And thank you so much, Marty and Emily, for and the planning committee for bringing this group together, but also for inviting me to join you and to provide a quick update on Project Reach. So last summer and we all know how last summer was and the last year was, it's self-evident that we needed to do something. And so the OCC conceived and launched what we call the Roundtable for Economic Access and Change, known as Project Reach now. And it brings together leaders of banking, civil rights, community development, technology, and business organizations to identify and reduce specific barriers that are preventing underserved and minority communities from full, equal, and fair access to the financial system and to the economy. So at a national level, Reach convenes those with the ability to help reduce inherent and structural obstacles so that the underserved populations that we all care about have the same opportunities to succeed and benefit from the nation's financial system just as others do. Shortly after the launch, the participants in Reach identified several key issues that are barriers to financial inclusion and equity for those populations. None of these will be a surprise to you, but they are lack of usable credit scores and credit, low rates of homeownership, and poor access to capital for minority-owned small businesses and minority depository institutions. So they set up 4 work groups that are working today. One is the inclusion of credit invisibles, the revitalization of minority depository institutions, increasing home ownership and the inventory of affordable housing, and expanding access to capital for minority-owned small businesses. All of the information about the National Reach is available at occ.gov/reach. reach. But I wanted to also share what we're doing at the more local level, what we call at our greater LA reach. Last December, we launched the Greater LA Reach as our first effort at launching a local initiative. And in that initiative, we have 3 work streams. And for the purpose of this meeting, I want to talk about the homeownership working group, because I think that's of most relevance here. That group is primarily made up of banks, local affordable housing, nonprofits, and developers, and other industry representatives. The work group determined that it needed to spend time both on homeownership preservation, because we do not want to lose any more ground than we have over the last several years, and also homeownership expansion for minority homeowners. With the end of the foreclosure and eviction moratoriums on the horizon, the group first decided to do a few things in preparation for those moratoriums to end. Several of the nonprofits put together a PSA, which is running now on our Spectrum News cable channel. And it's directing distressed homeowners to HUD-approved counselors and to a website that the group also launched under the leadership of one of our HUD-approved counselors. And that website also includes information on how to avoid foreclosure scams, because we've seen those begin to emerge again. And it's been translated into several languages. Also working with the servicers in the group, creating a master list of how to contact the servicers and escalate issues, because we know that the industry and the servicing side has completely changed since the last financial crisis. Additionally, a subgroup was formed to develop a model for a shared equity bridge loan to avoid foreclosure and help those homeowners retain their homes without losing all of their equity. In terms of the homeownership expansion part of the work, the group prioritized various issues, many of which have been already discussed at a high level here today and presented to us by Denise and others that everyone is trying to deal with. And the group prioritized and decided that the consensus was the main barrier to homeownership in the greater LA region is really a lack of affordable inventory. And I'm sure that's not any news to anyone in this meeting either. Inventory is a challenge across the continuum of housing, and that's putting a tremendous pressure on the lower end of entry-level homeownership housing. So the work group is looking at different models to expand inventory from ADU and small infill development to community land trust and shared and limited equity structures. We've had several speakers in to discuss the challenges and solutions. And one of the key findings of recent research on ADUs is that financing is a primary barrier. And we had met with Urban Institute, the Turner Center, and several others, the Casita Coalition. And while zoning has been expanded and many of the municipalities and laws in the state of California have really supported ADU construction, the financing continues to be a barrier, particularly for low and moderate and even middle income homeowners. And access to construction financing is really a difficult issue to cross that hurdle. So we just recently launched a small working group out of the several that are in our work group. And that smaller working group is now starting to work on the specific financing issue to come up with solutions and recommendations on how we can provide financing for those lower income and minority homeowners. And that's a quick, brief update. I'll stop there. Happy to talk with anybody offline or share more information and details later in the day or anytime. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Beth, for that great overview of what's happening in other markets and more broadly, and how we can probably line up and dock up with that.
And I wanted just to mention quickly too, that several of the national banks that are on the call and in your group here today, Marty, are also members of our Project Reach team in Greater Los Angeles. And we really appreciate their participation.
You bet. Great to point that out. We're so fortunate to have Washington Bankers Association, Mortgage Bankers Association, and all those members combined in this effort. It's just a great thing to see. I want to zoom in just for a minute. You mentioned inventory. And I'd like to just pick up, Brett, can you give us 3 minutes on your condo project in Capitol Hill, if you're with us today?
Yeah, I am here, and I'll keep it to 3 minutes. So thank you guys again for the opportunity to speak. I'm Brett with Habitat for Humanity. So 2 things about this project are unique. First, I think when a lot of people think about Habitat houses, we think about volunteers building houses, and they're typically family-sized homes. And one of the things that actually struck me in the last time this group convened was I wanted to go pull the data and see, who our buyers are when they close. And come to find out, at the time they buy their Habitat house, our average buyer is 37 years old and in a family of 4. And it's great that we have housing situations for those families, but we talk a lot about, equity and wealth generation and why wait until they're 37 years old to be able to generate that. And so density and building up is something that Habitat's talked about for a while, but it's a little bit outside of our wheelhouse in terms of construction. So we wanted, one, to look at smaller units, 1 or 2 bedroom, true starter condos, place them in urban areas around jobs, and think, what if we could get that 24-year-old professional making $55,000 into an equity earning situation at that age of 24? And what does that look like 10 years later? We would hope to think that they've got equity and they're not buying open market. So in order for us to do this, and I'll talk about one of the projects on Capitol Hill, we were able to find a for-profit development partner in Green Canopy with a little bit more of the expertise around this type of building. They actually came to us. They were interested in finding a way to do affordable housing. They were patient, and that they brought us a number of projects until we finally found one. So what we landed on is sort of a test project. It's relatively small at 17 units. We could have maxed out the density, but livability was important. We didn't want to do micros or studios. We want something that somebody wants to own and can stay in for a little while. So we landed on 1 and 2 bedroom primarily. We do have a couple of 3s spread across both of the buildings that we're building. And it's worked out. On paper, we are moving forward with it. Cost to acquire at market rate and develop is about $5.5 million. So by the time we're able to bring in public subsidy, we're going to be looking at 1 bedroom units well below $200,000 price point, 2 bedrooms at maybe a little over 2. So really accessible, great amenities in the buildings, really good locations. And what we think, if we can continue to work with partners like Green Canopy and other developers, is that we can scale this, because from our capacity standpoint, they're taking it from feasibility through turnkey. So what Habitat's doing is, we know affordable low and medium income buyers that need this type of stuff. We're able to pair them with HomeSite for great mortgage products, but they're going to do the building. So we think it can scale if we can get more of these relationships. And we're continuing to look at projects. We signed an MOU for a feasibility on one in the Central District with a community group there that would be 55 units. So we're always going to be doing our family sized with that you're typical for Habitat, but we really want to look at different locations and getting younger buyers in.
Super, Brett. Thank you. And thank you for your creativity and your willingness to do the joint venture stuff and the turnkey stuff. It's got to be a thing that's going to be part of our effort here if we're going to get that scale. So good on you for that. Denise, Brett mentioned buyers. I know you guys have been working on the portal for a while. What is the portal? And can you give us 3 minutes on what you're doing there?
I sure can. Thanks, Marty. So the portal is an online platform that allows home buyers and homeowners to connect with the supportive resources available directly through an online platform. So for folks who prefer an online platform, or for folks who might need to be working on their side of this process during non-typical work hours, it is a resource available. They can select to connect directly with a specific service provider, or they can send out what we call a broadcast request to connect, which is like a bat signal that says, here's what I need, who can help me? And any service provider who provides the service requested in the county where the homeowner or home buyer has requested that service will see an alert and have the opportunity to respond and connect with that individual to provide the help that they need. That tool is available for people who need help with home buyer assistance, foreclosure prevention, repair assistance, debt management, and also just other homeowner needs, sort of a catch-all. And the reason we included debt management, even though it is not home ownership specific like the other services are, is because it is such a commonly named barrier to achieving that dream of home ownership. And so we really wanted to create a place where when a service provider finds that somebody is not currently ready to buy, which is often the case, we know that they don't usually have the resources to cultivate that person in the longer term timeline that is needed to build credit or build savings for down payment. And so the idea is that the portal will provide a space where that person can, instead of being released off into the wild blue yonder to kind of sink or swim on their own, to mix metaphors, they will have a bit of a container to hold them, to support them in working their action plan, to connect them to other supportive resources that can help them along the way to make progress on that action plan, and really help move them from home ownership curious to home ownership ready. And then they can connect right back to those different home buyer assistance programs to help make that happen when they are ready. So that's something we've been really excited to be working on. It's been something we're working on for quite a long time. We feel really excited that we're going to be able to hopefully use that as a tool to really contribute a lot to this initiative, and to really just play a role as a connector, as we have in telephonically for so many years. If anybody wants more information about that, feel free to reach out after the meeting. I could say a lot more about it, but I know we are pressed for time.
Thank you, Denise, for that teaser. And yes, I hope you get lots of queries on that. I'm not sure Julie was able to connect. She was emailing, but we have asked Julie Howe and Uche from Homesite, Julie's from the university, to just give us 2 to 3 minutes on co-op housing. This is, again, in the genre of doing things differently. So Uche, I know you're with us. You guys can go ahead and have the floor.
Oh, thank you. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what Homesite is doing right now in terms of increasing the homeownership rate for BIPOC community, and in particular the Black homeowners, potential Black homeowners. So Homesite is piloting the development of a 68-unit nonprofit limited equity housing cooperative. It will have 1s, 2s, and 3-bedroom units, and it will be at Othello Square, which is in Southeast Seattle's Othello neighborhood by the light rail station. And right now we're working through the last financing hurdle. We see the success of this project setting a precedent for other lenders to enter the limited equity cooperative financing market with more confidence, because they've seen that it can be done successfully. And we are also partnering with Verity Credit Union, who will be the preferred lender for financing the individual share loans, both traditional and Sharia compliant. A little background about the structure. The co-op structure is comprised of 2 entities, the co-op corporation and the member owners, which are the households or individuals who purchase shares of the co-op, and the members share in the building and land equity, as well as the costs, which are collected by the corporation to meet their financing obligations like monthly assessments, the building shared mortgage, et cetera. And so a buyer's income when they purchase is restricted to 80% and below, so that we can reach that population that's finding it very difficult to break into the housing market here in our region. And so the limited equity piece means that when members sell their unit, the sales price is based on a predetermined resale formula included in the corporation's bylaws. And so as the property increases in equity, when a member sells a unit, they acquire a smaller percentage of that. They acquire a smaller percentage of that equity when they sell. And then this limitation is in place to ensure that the co-op remains affordable for future households to purchase. And so the cost of entry is low compared to what's out in the open market, between $42,000 to $79,000 to purchase a unit shares. And the co-op share supports the shared mortgage. It supports residents who may not be able to get a traditional loan for a fee simple home. So by being part of that collective payment structure, they have more access to owning their own home. And we feel that co-ops are another opportunity for folks to build an asset in which they can pass on, to their family and or some equity if they decide to sell, which can be used as a foundation to purchase a future home. And in the meantime, because your housing costs are stable, you're able to increase your disposable income as well as your net worth. And of course, there's the non-quantifiable benefits of being a member of a co-op, stronger sense of community, the empowerment engendered by the democratic control process that co-ops advance. And that democratic control is felt by the members because now they have that control in their community and the decisions that they will make as a collective. And so we see limited equity co-ops as another tool in the toolbox to create affordable homeownership opportunities for future Black homeowners. And we plan to replicate this.
Super, Uche. So exciting. And we're all pulling for you as you pull this thing together. I noticed Ben Merritz is with us, and Ben, I can't give you a lot of time, but Ben's with great expectations, and I know he was talking about a rental project in Tukwila, and I asked you to consider, is it possible to do this as ownership? So wondering if you could just say a word or two, Ben, about what you're thinking about how you guys might play as a for-profit developer in this space. Are you there, Ben? Well, looks like we lost him. So I'm going to do one final check to see if Carla Strickland was able to join us. I don't see her listed, but Carla, are you on the phone? All right. I think we have gotten to the end of our plenary. So hopefully we will begin to catalog more and more of these opportunities in the coming weeks and months as you share things with us. And we're now going to get ready to go into our breakout groups. And these are the work groups. Patience mentioned we did some compression since March. And we want to spend some time now in these work groups focusing on some key areas. So each of these groups has a facilitator, they have a note taker, and they have also a set of priorities that came out of the March meeting that hopefully they can hone in on. So again, buyer identification, preparation, and sustaining homeowners has been combined, but really trying to figure out how do we do that identification and preparation work well? And how do we ensure that existing homeowners can stay in that position? We've also compressed construction financing with land scale production and creative types, such as the limited equity co-ops we just heard about, or land trusts, et cetera. We've been struggling to find an additional facilitator, so I've decided I'd compress those, and I'll take both of those on today with the group. And mortgage lending, Loretta will be leading. Denise is doing the buyer ID group. Loretta is going to take on the mortgage lending group, and then Patience will be doing policy reform. So we should have everybody's assignments figured out. Nathan's going to do his best to send folks to the right room. If you're struggling, stay in the main room and let him know, and he'll try to figure out how to move you. And I'm just going to give you a couple of thoughts here before we go. Denise mentioned that we're talking about real change. We're not talking about just doing more of the same, but we have to figure out how we overcome the negative impacts that have happened from our past structural and institutional racism. That means that we're going to have to probably think about breaking some rules. I'm not talking about doing against, doing something unlawful, but we are going to have to think about different ways of doing things and challenge current policies if we're going to be able to do what we want to do in this particular area. We're unfortunately here in the most perfect storm possible. You probably saw the Builder magazine announcement this morning that our house pricing in the area has grown 18+%, far more, a much more dramatic increase than the rest of the country. So everything that we possibly do has had a tidal wave thrown against it. But today is our effort to take all of what we're hearing nationally, what we could feel and perceive locally, bring our resources together, close triangles, weave our networks together, and see if we can come up with some strategies that really continue to move the needle. So with that, unless Denise or Patience, Emily, anything I'm missing, I think we should head out into our work groups.
I think that's everything, Marty. I'm looking forward to connecting with the folks in that buyer ID preparation and sustaining existing homeowners group.
Marty, I think there's one thing that I would ask you to elaborate on. From the end of these work groups, what would you like to see during the share out? What is the goal and the outcome that we're hoping to see by the end of these work groups?
Yeah, so I've been muted now. I am unmuted, I think. So several pieces to that, Emily. One is we want to know who's willing to stay in the work group and continuing to meet. This is probably the last time we'll do this as a combined effort until maybe September, October, when we prep for our Housing Washington presentation. But we want to know who's willing to meet and when the best time to meet is. Secondly, and more importantly, we also want to know what policy related issues your group comes up with that need to go to Patience as work groups so that they can consolidate all the policy related efforts. And then probably the most important piece is taking what we brainstormed in March, what we'll brainstorm again today and kind of chase around for a while. How do we come out with some key priorities? What are some things that we really want to emphasize and lean into in the next few years to hit that 3,000 mark and ultimately that commensurate percentage of ownership rate in 20 years? What do those strategies look like? And let's start to quantify those. And then when we get together in the group again, the plenary group after, we'll try to hear from those groups and synthesize some of that and continue to move that forward into a work plan. Thank you, Emily. Anything else? All right, Nathan, I think now we're down to you.